he entered a world where fantasy is real, where he could be anything he wanted, and where he would discover the most dangerous temptation of all.
Come and get me, boys. Diamonds are a girl's best friend. I believe you were expecting me.
Yes. Silly. I think you would fall in love with someone like me.
I can't fall in love with anyone and make men believe what they want to believe.
Never knew I could feel like this.
I believe in truth, freedom, and above all things, love.
Like I've never seen the sky.
You're gonna be bad for business, I can tell.
Roxanne!
I am willing to provide the financial resources to make you a star.
You don't have to wear that dress tonight.
I require a contract that binds Satine to me exclusively.
He could destroy everything.
I don't care. We have each other.
Make Christian believe you don't love him.
He'll fight for me.
Hurt him to save him.
Whatever happens, no matter how bad things get, we love one another.
Kill the boy.
This story is about love at the Moulin Rouge.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. It's so lovely to see you all.
Hello.
How are you? It's
You have to say hello from where you are in the world. So it's a great opportunity for us to all get together and talk about what was in many ways a surprisingly groundbreaking experience that we didn't expect in some ways with the 20th anniversary of Moulin Rouge, the movie. And so I'm here a little bit to help represent the ladies in this week of International Women's Day. And, you know, we're here to have a chat about some of the great experiences that we had. But I thought it'd be great for everyone to introduce themselves first. So, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's Chris Godfrey. I was the supervisor for production on it. At the time, I was one of the owners of Animal, but took myself out of that for this. And currently, I've finished another film and I'm unemployed. So if anybody's looking for a supervisor, there's always an opportunity. No, at the moment, I'm at home having a break, which is good. But it's good to see everyone.
It is lovely to see everyone. Simon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Simon Whiteley. I was one of the many visual effects art directors and matte painters on the movie. And I'm currently in Tasmania.
Lovely.
Calling in from sunny Tasmania, yes.
And Justen?
Yeah, I'm Justen Marshall. I was in R&D at Animal Logic at the time, and we did Moulin Rouge, and I am still in R&D at Animal Logic 20 years later, and I'm in the office in Sydney right now. So
that's a good place to be. Sydney at Animal's a good place to be. My name's Krista Jordan. I am currently the head of animation at the Australian Film, Television and Radio School, but at that time, I was one of the many fabulous people working on the film, and at that time, I was compositing. And so let's start with a little bit around the VFX production side of things. So in terms of the film as a whole, it's a groundbreaking film in lots of ways. It did lots of amazing things for the Australian industry. But let's just talk a little bit about the visual effects side of things. So Chris, sort of drawing back on that amazing memory, do you remember how the project started from a visual effects perspective?
The project started because I got a phone call from CM, Baz Luhrmann's wife, saying that they had just finished Romeo and Juliet and they were looking to do a new project. And so I went through a long discussion because it was going to go through Fox Studios. And so, oh God, who was it? Somebody at Fox had suggested me. Anyway, I had a meeting with Baz and it was agreed that I would come onto the production, which stage there was meant to be about 70 shots and it was meant to be quite small. And then it went from 70 to 470. But that was in a show which was in total, I mean, if we think about it, that's in a show that had almost 3,300 shots in it, which is huge. It's a very cutty film. I mean, the current one I've just finished is Mortal Kombat, and we had 1,800 visual effect shots. So considering we made the whole of Paris, all of the surrounds, all the push-ins and everything else, it was actually quite innovative.
Oh,
we
it was.
changed a huge amount, and it also was a different look to any other film at the time, you know, which was Baz and CM.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is when you talk about the editing, you know, Jill Goodcock won many awards for that editing, and that was really amazing and fantastic and quite unusual. As you say, there's a huge number of shots in the film, and for every one of those shots, you know, people's hands, certainly in the visual effects and on set, touch those sorts of things. So talking about the look a little bit, Simon, in terms of that experience of translating sort of what CM and Baz had in terms of the vision for the film into a virtual and visual effects paradigm worked, what was your experience in that space?
Well, we all know from looking at the previous movies of Baz and Catherine's Simply Ballroom and Romeo and Juliet, that Baz is very theatrical and loves staging things. So rather than just filming things outdoors, everything is everything that we built of Paris and all the locations that we went into felt like they were, you know, they could have been in the theatre and they were set up as if they were on a stage, which was very interesting for us. Having we're trying to make things look real and trying to make things seat into an environment, indoors or outdoors. So yes, it was a completely different take on what we were trying to create.
Yeah. My experience in that space was around the fact that I'd spent a lot of my visual effects career trying to make things look real in inverted commas, and this was much more sort of heightened reality, visual effects for storytelling purposes. There's a whole lot of subtext in it, and Justen and the whole team worked together, you know, so that, you know, R&D and the tool building, working with the visual artists, working with Chris in supervision to kind of find ways to meld those two worlds together. How did you find that, Chris?
Oh, the original material, like behind you, is actually an image of the film, from the film. Yeah. And one of the things,
image.
That's my matte painting.
One of the things we did from the outset was, just to go back to what you were just saying, I mean, yes, it wasn't real, but at the same time, it was an incredibly complex and technical film for many reasons, including the fact that it was attached to music. So all of it suddenly had story beats and also music beats and other things we had to hit on a regular basis. But if you have a look at the image that's behind Krista at the moment, one of the interesting things was to actually make Paris in that space, and also to fly in and out of Paris. We actually did a trick where we pushed every building was not X and Y was normal, but in Z we actually pushed it to, I think we reduced it to about 30%, and then we offset the building, so you'd always get a version of the building, but everything was squeezed because we actually did a test at one stage, and the idea was to fly through Paris and get to the Moulin Rouge, which is almost at the very tip. And that took a little over 30 seconds, whereas we were doing it in somewhere around 7 seconds. So
yeah, crash scenes.
So if you have a look, the whole thing when you're flying through it, the push-ins, the pull-outs and everything else, it's a party trick to actually get you into it. You still feel the dimensionality of the shots, you still feel the dimensionality of the buildings, But all the inventions that we made, I mean, including there was one invention which was a thing called the dancing grips. And the dancing grips was basically at one stage when Zidler jumps into the Moulin Rouge, they intended to, believe it or not, fly in a guy from America who's a cameraman stuntman who is going to get on a line and actually fly in with the camera past the people. And we came up with an idea, or I came up with an idea which was called the dancing grip. So I got a beatbox and I took it out and I found a grip who was doing nothing at the time. And I gave him a carton of beer and we put up a blue screen and I got him to dance from different angles, or he danced, I did from different angles and everything else. And we proved that we could actually do sprites and then move through it and all the rest of it. So that became the dancing grip. So up to that point, we had no answer for actually flying in or out of the Moulin Rouge.
Yeah, I love that stuff, the freak out moment, the, oh my gosh, how are we going to do it moment. That's so funny. That would have had huge implications for you and the R&D team in terms of how do you know, execute that? How do you help provide sort of assistance in that space to support the artists and support the director and the creative vision of the film? Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience in that space?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the dimensionality that Chris was talking about there was really important. And I remember the artists asking, you know, we need to get lots of geometry in here. We don't have time to model it all. You know, we really want the city to be distinguishable. This is not just some city. This is turn of the century Paris. A lot of people know what Paris looks like, even back then, let alone now.
Exactly.
You know, we have to be true to the look of that, and yet we still need to do all of these sort of tricks and cheats to make things, you know, actually work for the creative component of the film. And I remember us going through so many iterations of, you know, different ways of generating the cities, and then coming up in the notion of essentially drawing a map so that they could lay out the city blocks, the townhouses and things like that, and then we could synthesize them. And you know, they painted up tons of textures, and I wrote a tool that would basically just, you know, run around the outline of every city block and fill it up with buildings, and then sprinkle junk on the roof, chimney pots and random stuff that would sit on the roof. And it was that was. I think it did the job in the end, and it put a lot of sort of three-dimensionality into almost a two-dimensional, you know, view of the cities. So yeah, I thought that was a super fun project.
It is. And it's so interesting because you know, 20 years is a long time in visual effects and in technology, and you know, the concept now that, you know, particularly with the advent of virtual production coming into a big sort of moment, and that's that nexus between, you know, virtual craft meeting on-set craft, the sense that, you know, 20 years ago, things like, you know, real-time rendering, that would have been just unheard of. You know,
no real time.
Nothing was real time. I used to set a timer and then have a sleep and then go into the Marinda. But the sense that all of this stuff in terms of the craft is still fundamentally what we're doing. We've just got we've hit this kind of beautiful moment where all of the virtual craft, the speed at which we can execute virtual craft in some areas, whether it's previs or tech viz or whatever it is, allows us to have much more creativity in that space. And 20 years ago, we didn't really have all the bells and whistles quite as much in train as we do now, which was kind of. So in terms of some of that storytelling stuff, there were some great moments in the film, sort of iconic moments. So Simon, what are some of the iconic moments in maybe either the audience perspective of the film or your perspective as somebody working on it?
Well, working on the matte painting behind you was probably my largest endeavor. I managed to convince Zare, our boss, to let me fly to Paris, because I'd grown up in the UK and spent a lot of time in Paris, so I knew all of the locations that we needed, and ended up flying out with a 600mm lens, which was in a gigantic box. And yeah, the picture behind you, I ended up shooting from the Montparnasse Tower right on the other side of Paris. and I ended up tiling the whole of the city. Of course, we then had to go in and take out all of the signs and the modern parts of the building. But the great thing about it is that set back in 1899, Paris then is actually exactly the same as Paris is now. All the buildings were there. All we've done is slid everything around, as you said, Chris, to kind of condense things. And then the station that we flew in is the Gare du Nord, which is actually over to the right, but it's the most beautiful station in Paris. It's got amazing architecture. And the great thing about what Baz had done by setting it up in Moulin Rouge, at that time, this was the golden era in Paris. It was the La Belle Epoque. It was there. Everything was being built. The Eiffel Tower had just been built. The Paris Opera was being built. The metro station was being built. And the Sacré-Cœur that's up on the hill was actually in construction. So in that painting, the matte painting that you see behind you, Krista, the Sacré-Cœur's still got the scaffolding around it. And we've slid, I think we slid the Eiffel Tower into frame because the Eiffel Tower is over down the Seine on the left. But
from memory, Krista Jordan, no, not Krista, sorry, Kirsty Miller actually put that together. And I think from memory, it had 370 odd components to it.
Yeah.
So individual live action components that were put in.
I love that you mentioned Kirsty. There were some amazing women who worked on the show alongside everybody else, even on the visual effects and the sort of the virtual craft side of thing. And I remember spending many hours with Kirsty and taking guidance from Kirsty around, you know, how we were going to make that shot, all those elements come together. So, you know, in many ways, from my perspective, working on it, Chris, you and the art department and the team, and you know, you were the sort of the conductor in terms of bringing all the elements together and making it work. And then Kirsty and my role is, and along with many others in the compositing team, was trying to meld all those bits together and make it work. And there are a vast number of elements in some of those shots. So even you just keeping track of all that material and having a really great sense of how it was all going to come together. What was that experience like in terms of, you know, working in that zone, making sure that what was happening on set was, you know, being reflected in our visual effects? How was that?
Well, anybody who's worked with Baz knows that it's he's an opportunistic director, as in he starts with a definite, we're going to shoot that. And then he gets into it and goes, well, if we only had that, like there was no flying over Paris. That didn't exist. That was David Dulac pulling apart a postcard for me, where we had a postcard of Paris, we pulled it apart because in a much earlier script, there was a thing about there's a postcard on the wall and we look into the postcard. But we also then, I think there was 12 scripts and one of them even had Uncle Lolo, who Satine goes to the top of the Eiffel Tower and actually flies off to the south of France. So that was another one. But it's what would end up happening is it was a rolling re-examination of what the requirements were. And it went all the way from we need to now build more, and in building more, we decided that they would actually be miniatures. So then we got in Tom Davies, who made a grouping of miniatures for it. And we were shooting the miniatures as they were being made. So we had 6 weeks of motion control and Milo. That was all lined up with what our previous had done. So we were doing a mammoth amount of material that was going from our previous and what was on set shot to the motion control, to what we were shooting as additional people, to the rest of it. And we got all the way through. And I mean, we were still shooting miniatures and everything else right to the very last. And in fact, the very last day that I was shooting, I was so sick, I was lying on the ground and I said, can I please have an ambulance? And they said, no, we've only got another 5 more shots. It's okay. So
oh my God.
We had a mammoth amount of material, but the quality of the material was just exceptional. I mean, we had Don McAlpine as a DOP.
I know, beautiful.
You can see it in the fine detail, the close-ups and everything else. We also did an amazing amount of technical stuff that nobody even notices. Things like Don, we ended up shooting a 2-to-1 anamorphic. You know, they've now got 1.65s and 1.3,
Yeah,
1.25 and everything else. But he had 2-to-1 anamorphics, and because it was really complex in those days for CG, all of the CG was actually done as spherical. Nobody even picks it or knows it because he did such a beautiful job of it. And also, if you remember too, we ended up, the film itself was finished in film.
I know, I was going to say that some of the beautiful quality of it is that it is actually film, not just pixels.
And also, nobody can pull that apart. Nobody could actually do we'll highlight that, we'll do that. Everything was finished in film and was presented. Like the shot behind you, the only thing they had was printer lights.
Yeah, that's right.
So everything you see there, the beauty of it, what you see and what you don't see, was all created by the artists who could actually pull it together. And we'd go, okay, can we see it? Can we not see it? And we were calling printer lights and we were going -2, quarter down, 3 up. And it was coming through and we were going, okay, that'll work. So it was a very different time.
It was a very different time. I'm curious, Justen, in terms of, so that volume of material that we were all, the company had to deal with in a virtual side of things. Were there any impacts on R&D in terms of how to manage that volume?
Well, keeping in mind that R&D was really 2 people at the time. I think that was myself and Chris Bone. And Animal didn't have an asset management system to speak of at the time either. We now refer to that as our version 0 asset management system, which means we didn't have an asset management system. And, that there were some challenges associated with that for sure, which were really just, keeping track of stuff was difficult. We ended up with hardware around the place that was kind of cobbled together. And, I'll put it this way: it was a period of growth for Animal Logic, a period of learning and growth in the technology side of things. There were things we did on Moulin Rouge that we got the job done with, and that I hoped we would never do again. And pretty much we didn't do them again. We did a lot of made a lot of improvements. We bought larger servers and instituted proper backup techniques and management of our assets. So the volume of that data that you're talking about there, I mean, it flooded in and it was kept track of by people. It wasn't kept track of by systems, which again is a testament to the times. Like these days, it seems inconceivable that you would manage a show like that. But everybody knew where things were. It was the team was tight.
Naming convention? What are you talking about?
Well, we had naming conventions. I don't know how good they were, but
yeah, that's true. And I think the one thing that I love about the film and kind of what it stands for in my mind is all those great Australian films that really stretched us all. So this was one of those great Australian films that stretched us all and showed that we could do it and pushed us out of our comfort zone and challenged us creatively and made a huge impact, in terms of audience response, like across all paradigms, obviously steered by Baz and CM and their vision for the film. But every aspect, everyone who contributed to that film was really pushed out of our comfort zones in order to really, go as hard and as fabulous as we possibly could, which was super cool. I really love that about it. So one of the other iconic shots, and again, it's kind of Baz, the film's capacity to take themes and twist them and change them. That how Green Fairy absinthe scene. So that was hugely iconic at the time, and such a great sort of piece to get Kylie involved, because obviously she had a profile and that was fabulous and it looked fabulous and it told a great story. Has anybody got any good stories about that particular sequence? I'm looking for hands.
Oh, look, I was there at the shoot, and one of the nicest things about my job ever was Kylie looked down and said, "What do you do?" And we spent 5 minutes talking, and somebody in that outfit where they're lifted will last 20, 30 minutes. She was in there for 8 hours.
Yeah, that's the other, it's really physical. But, Nicole, I think I knew some of the stunt team on that and some of the safety officers, safety team. And all those flying rigs, they are not easy to be in. And in those costumes, it is not a comfortable place to be.
And also at the end of it, Baz actually said, can you sing it yourself without backup, without anything? She's the most amazing voice. So that was, I think, one of the highlights of the whole thing.
That is so cool. And it is such a beautiful, you know, it's such an iconic image, and it ties in so perfectly with the taking essentially, you know, a musical piece that, you know, Baz make musicals cool in film again. There weren't a lot of musicals around in there. And then tying that to contemporary music, and then, you know, bringing together sort of amazing contemporary craft and making it turn its attention to a beautifully sort of hand-touch film. So that was really cool. So Simon, I know there's, oh, go Chris.
Do you remember there was, this had 3 videos that he had actually, to get over the line, to get it through Fox. And it was Fred Chandler who actually was a big import on this one from Fox. But when he was putting it forward, and Baz did 3 videos, one was a can-can, a straight up can-can with modern music. And it looked as though somebody had sped it up like 200%. It was just stunning. It was quite amazing. The second video was getting a range of music across history, across different techniques and everything else, and putting it to Chemical Brothers and cutting that. And Jill Bilcock cut it to prove that any dance could go with any music.
Yep.
And the third one was Spectacular, where he got, once again, I think it was a Chemical Brothers song, and cut a traditional Indian film to this. And it was a proof of, and it was a really interesting thing. When anybody started on the job, we would show them these 3 videos, and they go, oh yeah, that's what we're after.
Yeah, it's that visual brief, that sort of the essence of the film, the rhythm and juxtaposition that they used in the style of it. It's so cool. That would have been awesome to see.
And yeah, and it is one of those things where it was a proof of, but also it was something that it was so much easier when you bring somebody on the film and you go, this is where you're heading. Otherwise, they've got to get acclimatized, whatever it is. And it's like any creative thing. You start off and you go, okay, we're in a 360-degree circle. Which way are we facing?
Yes.
You go, bam, we're over there.
Yep.
And it was so quick. And so for everybody, including myself, suddenly you're going, I know what film I'm working on.
Yeah.
And so Baz is very, he listens to people around him. And he's very good. He's a great arbiter of taste. And so if somebody comes up with an idea, he will either chase it or not chase it, depending on how it works. But he is phenomenal the way that he can actually listen to different things. And also, if he listens to something and he doesn't agree with it, he will also tell you why he doesn't agree with it. So it's a learning process. Yeah. So the process of actually working around it, I mean, look, he should actually give masterclasses to other directors, because on occasion you'll work with another director and they get lost in what the vision is. I mean, Baz himself gets lost in the vision and goes, we're all heading over here. And then he waits to see how the cut goes. And
it's the creative testing and it's the creative experimentation part of it that he can help direct and navigate that process. I like working with him because he's one of the few directors who, from my experience, once he would always speak to you about how the feeling of the shot. So instead of 1 pixel up, 1 pixel right, 1 pixel down, 1 pixel, left, right? Which can be very frustrating when you're a creative artist in that space and you're trying to bring value and add value to the shot, for example. Baz, when I was in a room with him, would never do that. He always spoke of, I want it to feel like this. I need the audience to feel like this. I want it to say this. It was always came back to story. And then it was up to me to interpret that visually and then present those, those versions. And he would then go, oh yeah, that's the one that I mean. Let's head down that direction. So I really liked working with him in that space too. And Simon, speaking of all, so there's a lot going on. I was wondering, there's so much, I'm not sure how much people realize the amount of research that goes into developing this sort of imagery. And the art department and obviously the visual effects teams, but certainly the art department, I know, did a huge amount of research. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you go about researching a film like that?
Yeah, totally. Well, of course, we went onto the internet straight away, but there's actually very little. There's a few black and white photographs of Paris. There's a lot of paintings, and probably I think Catherine used Toulouse-Lautrec was probably the main source of inspiration behind the images, because he painted the Moulin Rouge, he painted the Montmartre, he probably painted the seedier side of Paris. But yeah, we went on the internet, we couldn't find much. But the amazing thing was that Catherine had done all of these color boards. And everything that you see on,
yeah, talk us
everything she had done was exactly what was on the color boards. And the weird thing about the whole movie was, I think when they were inside Moulin Rouge, everything was overcolored and bright and lavish and sumptuous. And then the further away you got from it, and this kind of fed into what you were telling me about his feeling and romance that he wanted to get from the image. And it wasn't about what, the technicalities and what was in the image. So we'd all done all of these amazing matte paintings, and the one behind you I'd done in full color. All of the street scenes and the fly-ins we'd done in full color. But because he wanted all the color to be within Moulin Rouge, the further you got away from Moulin Rouge, the more desaturated, the more sepia, the more grainy and out of focus. And it ended up looking exactly like the photographs that you see of the period, and also the paintings of Toulouse-Lautrec. So yes, it was amazing. I painted all of that color and detail into the painting, and then when I saw it up on the screen, it was like this sepia, grainy. He was even flickering because he wanted it to get it look like old-fashioned film. That opening when the curtains pull apart, and I love him for that he focuses on what the story is. And the story was the Moulin Rouge, and everything else was incidental to it.
And everything's in service of that experience as well. So did we have to build was there any sort of custom tools that we had to build? We talked a little bit about approaches in terms of how we manage things. Was there any sort of custom or proprietary tool building that we had to do, Justen, in order to help us get where we needed to go?
Yeah, I mean, we built plugins and things for the tools that we used at the time. We had our own translator, Softman, that we were using at the time to get from Softimage, which was where we did most of the 3D work, into RenderMan. That we built a range of different tools for artists to use. The city builder that I mentioned before. We made a particle system for the Green Ferry shot. A handful of other things. It was such an adaptive process that a lot of those tools, they were not like briefed in advance, like, oh, we're going to build a city, we'll need a city builder. It was, we've got this creative problem we're needing to solve, and we just can't solve it by bashing our head against it. We now need tools to help us. And so really at the time, and look, generally speaking, I suppose in this industry, R&D is half about this anyway, which is that sort of adaptiveness. You've got to go, you're not writing software for a bank where you plan it and you build it and you implement it and you test it and you release it. You're rolling with the punches, and you're filling that creative brief.
I think you're underestimating yourself. I think in reality that what we have to wrap our heads around is that you're part of that creative iterative process, and you can't divorce one from the other.
Exactly.
And so in terms of adding validity to the whole process, that everyone is in train doing that stuff. So we're all in service of the story, we're all in service of the film, and we're all bringing different stuff. And you can't do this stuff without, creative iteration. You can't do this stuff without allowing, having some opportunity for you to deviate from a predetermined path. Otherwise, we won't get anything more interesting.
You also can't take no for an answer, and you can't accept no for an answer from yourself either. There's no, it can't be done. We get it done. We've got to we've got to solve these problems because, you know, the directors, especially when you're working with a director whose vision's really clear and they can communicate that, and you can know what you're trying to achieve. You can see that you haven't achieved it, and you know that you've got to do more. So we do more.
But I do believe, though, the other side to it is when we were doing this film, R&D weren't really a big integrated section of any film.
No, that's right.
So
right at the ground floor.
Yeah. So the reason why I think, you know, Animal excelled in this particular process is because there was a lot, the design and the R&D worked with production as such and came up with solutions that were evident. And also, you know, we don't, at this particular time when we start this film, we had the, you know, 90 something pages, whatever it was. We were still, as we were doing it, we were still churning out new versions of the script. And as you said, you don't say no to a person like Baz. You say, I can't do this, but I could do this, this, and this. Now, the good part about it is he also then builds on and goes, well, if you could do this, then we could have, and so it's a growth period. So it's, I think it's the open dialogue, which is so important. And actually having open dialogue in a group that actually you can say, well, I can go this far, or I could do that. Or let's go back and actually rethink it. And it's always the rethink rather than going, gee, I've only got this idea, that's it. So whatever you do, I'm not going to move off this path. This is exactly what we're going to do. And I think that films suffer from that. I think every film has to be rethought from the beginning. And just because it might be version 2 or it might be a thing, you know, if it's a shark film, okay, it's, but for the most part of it, if you're going to do a Moulin Rouge and then you're going to jump and you're going to do a Gatsby or something like that, it's a total rethink. It might be the same director, it might be the same suit, it might be whatever, but it's a total rethink. And I think everybody has to be up for a total rethink of process. Otherwise, you get yourself caught in a situation where you have to say, can't do it. That's it.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's that interesting piece that 20 years ago there was no sort of substantive R&D team, and that, you know, the skills were being, it was very formative in that space in terms of certainly in the Australian landscape and Australian films making these, you know, this was a really big film for Animal Logic. It was a big film for Australia. It was a big film, and that was super cool. And the fact that everyone was brave enough, and particularly obviously Baz, but brave enough and committed enough to do it, and do it here, which I love. Like, there was so many amazing Australian talent that worked on that film, and I think that is part of the joy for me of that film. It's one of those great Australian films, and there are many of them, but that says, yeah, we can do it. You know, we can do this amazing stuff in Australia, and there's no reason why we can't.
Well, there was a wonderful moment when they were doing the, they got the orchestra in, and at that stage, Baz had moved over to LA. And so I was flying in and out of LA every 2 weeks between Sydney and LA. But I was sitting there one day and the orchestra had just finished. And the comment from the orchestra said, it is so different. Visual effects are so different, are so engaging. They had to actually, normally they come in and they've got material and they go, oh yeah, we can put music to that. Yeah. All of them were taken by how beautiful it was, and they had to up their game. And so they actually said, we have to actually chase it, because for the first time in a long while, the visuals are bigger than what the
music brought. Yeah.
And so it was a build on build scenario. But I think, you know, the beauty of it is the number of different creatives who came into it, and also expressing all of their different talent bases and accepting that other people have other talents that you can utilize and you shouldn't actually push down. You know, it's like the material that Simon's done on even Babe, you know, the Matrix, you know, with Justen and the opening titles and things. Everybody has these different talents, and you've got to make use of them and actually absorb and give good detail and give good instructions and leave it as an open. And it's like what Baz said, what you were saying, you know, I want to feel like this. I want to get this out of it. Because if I end up telling somebody as creative as Simon or Justen, you know, give me one of these, they will.
Yeah.
But it's only as big as my vision or whatever.
Yeah, 100%. It's a massive team sport.
Oh, it is. Yeah, and you've got to be in it to win it.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. And you've also got to have the you know, guts to let people actually come forward with different items and say, yeah, or whatever, or accept it. And some of it, you know, the genius of some of the people we work with is just to behold.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious to know if anyone has favourite shots. Simon, have you got a favourite shot? Not necessarily your own or the one that you worked on. You got a favourite shot?
I love Andy Brown's work when we went into the station.
Yep.
And up the streets, all those little vignettes with amazing characters. Yeah, that for me is, you know, I mean, the inside of the movie, the inside of the Moulin Rouge is the most amazing thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And all the characters that are, you know, Toulouse-Lautrec and the people that are wandering around. It's all just, yeah, beautiful. It's one of my favorite movies, and the music on it is timeless. You can play it over and over again.
Absolutely. Justen, yours?
Yeah.
I hate to say me too, but I mean that whole push-in thing, it's such an iconic moment in the film, and it's like those vignettes that you're talking about, the little, you know, faces and people looking out of nooks and stuff as you're going past. Like I remember seeing versions of the shot that didn't have as much of that, or had maybe none of it. I can't really remember now, but I just remember as they got layered in and sort of more and more of them happen, and each of them is telling a little story, and it's like, I actually don't know how much the audience picks up on that. They may just see a bit of motion and a bit of stuff going on, but you know, there's the little guy offering his something seedy in the corner, and it's just yeah. That's when I think about the film, it is that shot that returns to me.
And then there's that classic when they push into Ewan McGregor on the in his window.
Yeah.
And you've got the sign next to it.
Yeah, that's cool.
And that is just amazing. And then, especially when Baz then did that again with the Chanel ad, just a classic shot. I think Grant Freckleton did the matte painting behind that one. And that one got to stay in beautiful colour.
It was close to my mark. God damn.
That's right.
Chris, yours?
Yeah, magical.
My favourite is actually the death of Satine, where we come up and we rise up. Everybody's around, and that shot finished there. And then we actually I shot an extra element for looking up, and the two guys are up on the fly floor, and then we look past them and we go past what was an additional shot of the crowd. Then we come up into a 3D of the top of the Moulin Rouge. And then we travel over and we see a blue screen of the Duke walking away. And then we tilt up and we go to motion control moving across between the blades, and then it changes from winter to spring. And then we go all the way through and go through the window with Ewan McGregor at the typewriter. And it was one of those, and it was all done to time. It was all done to the beat and the process and everything. And it was just one of those wonderful things when you sort of come to the end of it and you look at it and you go, that's not a visual effect shot. It's a beautiful storytelling point. And it actually worked. That part of it was just so extraordinary as far as, you know, and I watched the film because we were going to have this conversation. And I rarely ever watch my old work for whatever reason. But I watched the film and the film holds.
Yeah, it's a
20-year-old film.
Stories.
Wow, it's glorious.
It still looks beautiful. Fortunately, you know, it's still got all of that. And interesting for me, I'm not even going to talk about the specific. There's many beautiful shots, but for me, I always had a little love of the musical. So the fact that, you know, I just remember being excited about a screen musical again. That for me was super exciting, and it brought all of that magic of, you know, old school musicals, musicals that were, in theatres, music that was in, on stages, all of that beautiful kind of storytelling that melded with music, and then the vision on top, and then the screen language on top of that. That was just, for me, that was exciting. Just the fact that it had all of those elements in it, which was very cool. I really loved that a lot. So, and I did have another question. And then my last question to everyone, and I'm curious about this one too, is do you think, or what do you think in terms of where we are now? And we've talked about elements of it, but there was the one kind of particular element that you feel, had an influence either on the Australian landscape in terms of cinema, screen story, screen language, craft, or filmmaking in general, or screen story in general. Is there anything in particular that you think the film sort of upped the ante on, or left a legacy around? I'm going to go in reverse. I'm going to start with Chris this time.
The film itself, I think one of the most interesting things was it broke the back of whether we could do it in Australia, and to the extent where nobody in the world had done this before. Since then, there's been a few that actually are very similar or have a similar technique to it. Also, it gave, in a funny way, it actually, I remember Baz when I first spoke to him about the film, and he had just finished Romeo and Juliet, and he had 36 visual effects in that show, and he wasn't too happy with any of them. Now, and that was fairly simple. It was a brilliant film, but and he wanted to up the ante of it. I think, he became a 400-pound gorilla of visual effects after that. But the other part of it was simply the fact that we could prove that in Australia, regardless of me, Baz, whatever, there was a difference where we could actually take a concept, take a story, and actually give a very unique look to it that hadn't been achieved before. So I think it was not only a big learning point, it was a big jump of what we could achieve, and a self-confidence about how to move forward from there.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on that one. Justen?
I mean, coming at it from the technical perspective, it feels to me like, as Chris said, we proved we can do it. We may be far away from Hollywood, but that doesn't stop us. And also just specifically from an animal perspective, I mentioned briefly before, but it was a step up in maturity for us. It felt like a show. It may have come in only 60 or 70 shots or whatever it was, but it grew so big and we had to grow with it. And that left a legacy that still exists here today in terms of how we make movies, just having to scale up, and having to be adaptive, and that even the shows that come to you that you think are going to be small might not be. You got to keep your eye on them, because you might be caught up in something amazing, and to start with you might not know it. So keep going.
Simon?
For me, I think there's something raw about Moulin Rouge. It's true. Not, a lot of modern work nowadays is very CG, or it's very finished, or everything is fiddled with so much. I think the beautiful thing about it is that, there are areas that are like that and lavish, and then there are areas, it's like the first Star Wars. It's got a life about it on its own, and the people come out through it. It also shows that how adaptable animal logic is, that you can create all of these different kinds of varieties of shots all in one movie. And we've shown that in all the movies that we've, done since, even, Peter Rabbit, animated sections within it. And it was a joy to work on. Yeah.
Lots of long nights, but beautiful, pretty.
Yes.
I love all of your takes on that, because that's really, really opened my eyes up to some other ways of thinking about the legacy of it. I think I would have said I would have agreed with Chris as my baseline, but I think there's another listening to you all, there's another interesting aspect, and there's that, you know, it's everyone spoke to it a little bit, is that bravery thing, you know, take a risk, you know, back yourself, give it a red hot go, and Animal's always been prepared to do that. And, you know, to its credit, and to Chris's credit, and to Zaro's credit, you know, particularly at that time, prepared to take risks that nobody else was in the same space. And that takes, you know, a certain amount of possibly naivety, a big dose of confidence, and a whole lot of it's worth giving it a crack because we might just do something amazing. And I you know, total respect to, you know, everyone who particularly at that time was taking on the business responsibility on behalf of all of us to allow us to work on such a film. I thought that was very cool.
I think it is, and also I think it's very important, you know, at the end result, regardless of how it worked out. And I think this is very, very important about the way that Animal does work, or the good companies work. And I've now had a big opportunity to work with a number of companies, is whether they actually understand the story and production value.
Yeah.
And it's all about production value and story. And I still come down to the thing where you can watch South Park, and it's amusing because it's got a great story and it's got something to say.
Story is everything.
And so I think for a lot of what we do, you know, you've always got to put into the thing, what is the production value and what are you actually going to sell it on?
Yeah.
And it's really important, and it goes everywhere from production all the way down to visual effects and what we do and what we present.
Yeah.
And what we present, this was glorious.
Yeah, and a final note for me, I want to say thanks to the Fiona Crawfords of the world and the producers of the world who are behind the scenes making sure we get it done on time, on budget as much as possible, and, you know, listen to us when we're crying, and listen to us when we're whinging, and then listen to us when we're all super excited. So, you know, a big shout out to all the production teams, from the you know, PAs all the way to executive producers for doing that as well, because that's one element we haven't quite sort of really touched on. So a big shout out to them too. So I'm going to wrap this up now and say it's been lovely to see you all. And I'd love to give you a hug, but in COVID times, it's not going to happen. But a big virtual hug from me. So lovely to talk to you all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Krista.
No worries. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.